The camera zooms in on Darius Blackwell's determined face as he steps into the opulent yet darkened restaurant. The air is thick with tension. He glances over at the terrified woman in chains beside him. Her glowing blue skin is a stark contrast to the luxurious setting. "Please don't eat me," she whispers desperately. A low, menacing voice echoes through the room. "Your fresh serving, sir." Darius clenches his fist, his military instincts kicking in. The waiter steps back, but his cold eyes lock onto Darius. Time slows. The room is watching. Every movement feels like a trap closing in. What was supposed to be an ordinary dinner has turned into a fight for survival, as Darius vows to expose the twisted truth of the syndicate. Can he save her before it's too late? Or will they become the next victims in this galaxy of secrets? Tune in to witness the escape, the fight, and the shocking revelations. This is no ordinary meal. It's the beginning of a revolution. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Darius Blackwell had seen his fair share of strange things in the far reaches of the galaxy, but nothing quite like this. After completing a difficult contract on the planet Cirrus 4, he found himself docked at the space station Argos Nexus, a bustling hub for travelers from every corner of the universe. The station's reputation for high-end luxury and exotic entertainment was known far and wide, drawing in the wealthy elite and curious adventurers alike. The evening was calm, with the station's artificial stars twinkling brightly against the dark expanse of space. Darius leaned back in the plush chair of his ship, the Widow's Call, a comfortable sigh escaping his lips. The job was done, and his pockets were full. He had earned the rest, and it felt like the perfect time to enjoy a rare luxury. After all, he was a man who had worked hard and never asked for much. A good meal, a bit of peace, perhaps even a chance to relax with someone to share a drink. But things rarely went as expected. As he sat in the cockpit, the terminal beeped. A message blinked across the screen. Invitation to dine at Solace. Exclusive event. One night only. Your presence is requested. The message was clear, concise, and personal. The name of the restaurant Solace carried weight in the galaxy, known for its extravagant offerings and rare delicacies. The wealthy and powerful came from all corners to dine here. Most people couldn't get in unless they had connections or deep pockets. Darius had neither, but something in that message sparked his curiosity. He leaned forward, eyeing the details. It was an exclusive invitation, and with the credits he had just earned, he figured he could indulge himself for once. What harm could there be in enjoying a fine meal in the company of some of the galaxy's most influential? He accepted the invitation, curiosity, now his guide. An hour later, he walked through the grand, polished halls of Solace, his boots clicking against the cool floors. The restaurant's interior was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers floated above, their light refracting and casting colorful patterns across the walls. Tables made from rare meteorite stone shimmered with an ethereal glow. Alien species of all shapes and sizes filled the space, each dining in their own unique way. Humanoids with their heads held high, insectoid creatures whispering to each other, and beings with translucent skin that seemed to shimmer as they moved. The air buzzed with the sound of various languages, blending together in an intricate symphony of voices, while the subtle clinking of expensive cutlery echoed throughout the room. Darius took it all in with a steady gaze. This was no ordinary place. Everything about it screamed wealth, sophistication, and exclusivity. Yet something about it felt off. Like this was too perfect, too curated. A waiter, his tall, gray-skinned figure moving gracefully between tables, approached Darius. The waiter's multiple arms held various menus and tablets ready to assist. "Welcome to Solace, sir," the alien said, its voice smooth, almost mechanical. "May I take your order?" Darius, still processing the overwhelming atmosphere, quickly glanced at the menu that materialized in front of him. The holographic display flickered as the options appeared, each more exotic than the last. He ran a hand through his casually styled light brown hair, trying to shake off the feeling that he was out of his depth. "I'll have the rare steak. As bloody as you can make it." The waiter's lips curled upward into what might have been a smile, though his expression was difficult to read. "An excellent choice, sir. We pride ourselves on our fresh servings. Would you prefer the traditional preparation, or shall we serve it live?" Live? Darius blinked, unsure if he had heard that right. "Live, sir," the waiter confirmed, his voice unwavering. "We have the freshest ingredients available if you wish." Darius, still unsure of what he was hearing, chuckled. "Traditional is fine." He wasn't entirely sure what live meant, but he didn't want to know. He was here for a meal, not a bizarre experience. The waiter nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Darius to sip his drink, a local brew that tasted vaguely like whiskey with a strange metallic aftertaste. The food was taking longer than expected, but he didn't mind. He was enjoying the chance to observe the other diners, each one more extravagant and wealthy-looking than the last. His thoughts wandered, trying to process the oddity of the place when the waiter returned. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked a strange figure who was being led to Darius's table. The woman was tall, her skin a shimmering blue, and her long, wavy black hair cascaded down her back. She wore little more than a brown corset and matching underwear. Chains rattled as she moved, and her eyes, dark and filled with terror, met Darius's. "Your fresh serving, sir," the waiter announced, his tone filled with pride. "Would you like us to prepare her here? We can demonstrate the freshness of the meat." Darius's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated act. The woman was not a meal. She was a living, breathing being, and yet she was being presented to him as though she were no more than a slab of meat to be consumed. Her eyes pleaded with him, desperation clear in her gaze. "Please, please don't eat me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Darius's heart pounded in his chest, his training kicking in. This wasn't part of the plan, and it certainly wasn't a part of his usual job. But he was a man of principles. He wouldn't let this happen. He forced his voice to remain calm as he addressed the waiter. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice smooth, even though his insides were a whirlwind of emotions. "I'll handle the preparation myself." The waiter gave him a strange look, but nodded, stepping back to allow Darius and the woman some privacy. As the staff moved away, the woman turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, don't let them do this. I don't want to die." Darius leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to eat you. Stay calm. Play along and I'll get you out of here." The fate of this mysterious woman was now in his hands. And with that, Darius's night at Solace turned into something much more than a simple dinner. It was a mission, one that would change everything. The air inside the upscale restaurant felt thick now, a stark contrast to the elegant atmosphere from just moments ago. Darius Blackwell sat at the table, his eyes never leaving the woman in chains beside him. Her skin shimmered with an eerie blue hue, and her eyes, filled with fear and confusion, locked onto his as though she was hoping, praying, for some form of salvation. He could see the panic in her every movement, her trembling hands barely able to grasp the edge of the chair. It was clear she had been through horrors far worse than anything Darius had ever experienced. The sounds of laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses from around the room seemed to fade as Darius focused on the woman before him. The weight of his training kicked in, and his instincts began to override his discomfort. There was no time to waste. He couldn't let this continue, not on his watch. With the guards still watching from a distance, Darius reached into his jacket and calmly tapped a series of buttons on his wrist communicator. The encrypted signal he sent out would hopefully reach the widow's call. His ship docked at a nearby bay. He needed backup, fast, but for now, he was on his own. "Let's get you out of here," Darius whispered to the woman. His voice was low but firm, steady in the face of the chaos surrounding them. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, nodded hesitantly. She was scared, understandably so, But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hope as she realized that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. Darius sat back in his chair, playing the part of an ordinary diner, trying to give off the impression that nothing was amiss. His eyes scanned the room, watching for any sign of movement that could betray them. 2 guards stood near the entrance, their eyes occasionally flicking over to the table. They were watching him, and they were watching the woman, but they didn't know what Darius was truly capable of. "I'll get us out," Darius continued quietly, leaning slightly forward as he whispered to the woman. He noticed her chains were loose enough that they rattled as she shifted in her seat. The sight made his stomach churn. This wasn't just a matter of a strange meal. It was a matter of saving someone who had been enslaved, treated as an object and presented to him like nothing more than a commodity. The woman's voice trembled as she spoke, her words escaping in a barely audible whisper. "Thank you, but they'll never let us go. You don't know what the Dominion is capable of." Darius furrowed his brow but kept his voice level. "I've faced worse." He didn't elaborate further. It was unnecessary. He had seen enough in his time as a mercenary to know how to handle situations like this. But even so, this felt different. The sense of urgency was something he wasn't used to. He didn't typically play the role of the rescuer. His fingers brushed over the edge of the table, his mind calculating. He needed a way out, and he needed it now. The syndicate wasn't going to let this slip by without a fight. He had no doubts that they would be coming after him soon, if not immediately. He knew the Dominion was a shadowy organization, its influence reaching across several star systems. If they were behind this, things were going to get much worse before they got better. Just as Darius began to formulate a plan, the waiter, Lintar, returned. His expression was unreadable, his multiple arms holding a slate of new orders and various reports. "Sir?" the waiter said, his voice even more monotone than before. "I trust everything is to your satisfaction?" Darius, without missing a beat, flashed a smile, pretending that he was still enjoying his meal. Yes, everything's fine. I'll be taking the fresh serving to go," he said, making sure to emphasize the words fresh serving with a subtle irony that the waiter seemed to ignore. The waiter hesitated for a moment, his many eyes narrowing, clearly confused. "Sir, our policy usually requires consumption to take place on the premises. The fresh experience is part of the offering. We cannot simply—" Of course, Darius interrupted smoothly, already reaching for his credit chip. The moment of hesitation was enough to buy him some time. With a slight flourish, he swiped the chip, transferring a generous sum that would likely be more than enough to cover any policy concerns. The waiter's eyes widened at the amount before he quickly nodded, his demeanor shifting from professional to somewhat nervously accommodating. Of course, sir, we understand. Your meal will be wrapped and ready shortly." He stepped back with a bow, signaling to the other staff members to clear the area. Darius stood, offering a hand to the woman beside him. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm yet calm. She hesitated for a moment, looking from the guards to Darius, but then something in her eyes shifted. Trust, fragile as it was, began to form. She took his hand, her skin cool and delicate under his touch. They began to walk through the restaurant, a casual stroll that belied the tension in the air. Darius kept his body relaxed, walking with a confident air that suggested nothing was amiss. The guards watched them pass, but no one stepped in their way. The illusion that Darius was just another diner was still intact. As they neared the exit, Darius couldn't help but notice how surreal everything felt. The restaurant, once a place of opulence and fine dining, had turned into something far more sinister. The air seemed heavier now, each footstep leading them closer to the danger that awaited them outside. Just as they reached the sliding doors, the alarms blared. The lights shifted, turning from soft blues and purples to an emergency red. The waiters began to move in a flurry of action, and guards at the entrance turned their attention to Darius and Vera. But it was too late. Darius shoved the woman toward the exit as he drew his weapon, a small, sleek pistol hidden in his coat. The guards rushed toward him, but he was faster. 2 quick shots, non-lethal but enough to buy them time, and the guards dropped to the floor, unconscious. The doors slid open, and they were out. The cold air of Argos Nexus hit Darius like a slap to the face, but it was a welcome relief. The stars shone brightly overhead, and the quiet hum of the station's energy systems filled the silence between them. "Let's move," Darius said, his voice low but urgent. He pulled her toward the parked speeder, his escape vehicle. They climbed into the vehicle, and Darius slammed the door shut, locking it. He glanced at the woman beside him, her eyes wide with relief. "I told you I'd get you out," Darius said, the faintest hint of a grin pulling at the corners of his lips. But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of the situation. They weren't free yet. They still had to deal with the Dominion. He pressed the accelerator, and the speeder shot into the night sky. The battle for survival was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Darius knew he wasn't alone. The speeder shot through the neon-lit night sky of Argos Nexus, weaving between towering structures and bustling traffic lanes. Darius kept his eyes focused on the path ahead, hands steady on the controls. His mind was racing, even as the city blurred around him. The escape had gone smoother than he expected, but that didn't mean they were safe. Not by a long shot. Beside him, Vera sat tense, her blue skin almost glowing under the city lights. Her hands gripped the sides of the seat as she stared out of the window, her mind clearly a million miles away. The chains that had once bound her were now gone, discarded in the rush of their escape. But the marks of her captivity still lingered in her eyes that had seen more horror than anyone. She had been a prisoner, a pawn, and now she was free. Or at least she thought she was. "We're not safe yet," Darius muttered under his breath, his sharp gaze flicking to the rearview mirror. The black speeders had given chase, and they were still tailing them, though not as closely. He had shaken them for now, but that wasn't going to last forever. They needed to get off Argos Nexus and out of the Dominion's reach. Vera glanced over at him, her voice shaky as she spoke. "I never thought I'd make it out of there." Her words were quiet, almost like she was speaking to herself more than to him. "I thought I was just another victim, just another piece of meat for their twisted banquet." Darius's expression softened slightly. He knew what it felt like to be caught in something bigger than you, to be a cog in a machine that didn't care about your existence. But that wasn't going to happen to her, not if he had anything to say about it. "You're not a piece of meat," he said firmly. "You're a person, Vera, and we're going to make sure the Dominion never gets their hands on you again." She turned to look at him then, her blue eyes filled with something that looked like both gratitude and fear. "But how do you plan to do that? The Syndicate, the Dominion, they control everything. I don't even know who's behind all of this, but it feels like no one will care if I disappear. They'll just move on to their next fresh serving." Darius's jaw tightened. The weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. The Dominion had their fingers in every corner of the galaxy, pulling strings from the shadows, and they weren't about to let someone like Vera go without a fight. "I'll figure it out," Darius said, his voice unwavering. "One way or another will expose them, and when we do, the galaxy will never let them operate in the dark again." Vera didn't respond immediately, but Darius could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. She was still afraid, but there was something else now, a glimmer of trust. He didn't know where it came from, but he wasn't going to squander it. The speeders behind them were still there, but they were far enough away for Darius to relax his grip on the controls. He pressed a few buttons on the dashboard, activating the cloaking system. The speeder's energy signature flickered, blending seamlessly with the environment around them. It wouldn't make them invisible, but it would make them harder to track. As they flew further from the heart of the station, Darius's thoughts turned to their next move. The Dominion wasn't just some criminal syndicate. They were an organized network of powerful players with resources that spanned across multiple star systems. Darius knew that whoever was behind it all, they were dangerous. and if they wanted to silence Vera, they would do whatever it took to hunt her down. "Where are we going?" Vera asked, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "You mentioned a safe house. Is it far from here?" "Not too far," Darius replied, though his mind was still racing. "I have a contact on the outskirts of Argos Nexus who can help us lay low for a while. After that, we'll figure out what to do next. But for now, we need to disappear." The speeder descended, skimming the edge of the city and flying toward a section that most people avoided. The lower levels of Argos Nexus were a maze of abandoned buildings, neglected sectors, and underground passageways. The perfect place to hide if you knew where to look. As they neared the location, Darius's communicator buzzed. He reached for it, glancing at the screen. The message was from an encrypted number, a contact he'd used in the past. It was a warning. The Dominion had already begun sweeping the station for them. There were multiple security patrols at the exit points, and the Syndicate was ramping up its efforts to track them down. Darius cursed under his breath. He had hoped for more time, but the fact that the Syndicate was moving so quickly meant that the Dominion was panicking. That was a good sign. It meant they were on the right track. "We need to move fast," Darius said, his voice urgent. "Stay low, and don't make a sound. We're going to have to go through the Undercity to avoid detection." Vera nodded, her expression hardening. She was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter now. The speeder landed quietly in a hidden bay, far from the main landing zones. Darius helped Vera out of the vehicle, his eyes scanning the area. The air was thick with the scent of rust and old machinery, but it was quiet. Too quiet. They would have to be careful. As they made their way through the narrow alleyways, Darius couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were up against. The Syndicate had eyes everywhere, and no place was truly safe. But he wasn't going to let them take her back, not after everything they had been through. Vera spoke again, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I didn't tell you everything. About how I ended up with the Dominion. How they found me." Her voice was low, barely audible as they walked through the dark passageways. "I thought it was just a simple entertainment contract. They promised me fame, riches, a future, but the moment I signed, I was theirs." Darius stopped in his tracks. "Tell me." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I was a dancer on Nova Prime, performing for the elite. The Syndicate approached me with an offer to work at Solace, a place where I could showcase my talent to a broader audience. But that's when everything changed. They didn't want a dancer. They wanted a product. They wanted me to be part of their fresh-serving menu. I was going to be used, no, consumed, for the amusement of their wealthy guests." Darius felt a deep anger surge within him. The thought of what she had been through was infuriating, but it wasn't enough just to be angry. He needed to stop the Dominion from hurting anyone else. "They didn't just enslave you," Darius said, his voice low. "They've been experimenting on you, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want." Vera nodded. "I overheard them talking. There's more to this than just Solace. They've been testing genetic manipulation, enhancing the meals they serve. And it's not just about making them tastier. It's about control." Darius's mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. He had known something wasn't right. But this was far worse than he could have imagined. "You're not the only one they've done this to, are you?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with grim realization. "No," Vera replied softly. "There are others. I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last unless we stop them." Darius nodded, a fire igniting within him. They couldn't just run anymore. It was time to take the fight to the Dominion. Time to expose their twisted operations and make them pay for what they had done. "Let's put an end to this," Darius said, his voice fierce with resolve. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back." And so their journey continued, no longer just a fight for survival, but a battle against a dark force that had infected the galaxy. The war was far from over, but with each passing moment, their resolve grew stronger. They were no longer fugitives. They were warriors, and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity was not so easily defeated. The days following their escape were filled with constant movement. Darius and Vera kept to the shadows, always on the move, never staying in one place for too long. The syndicate was relentless, their forces tracking every lead, every whisper. Yet with every pursuit, Darius's resolve only grew stronger. He was no longer just trying to keep Vera safe. He was fighting to expose the truth of the Dominion's atrocities, to take down the shadowy empire that had enslaved innocent beings for sport. They had arrived on a small, remote moon, a place far from the bustling trade routes of Argos Nexus and Nova Prime. It was an unassuming rock in the galaxy, mostly ignored by the powers that be. It was the perfect place to lay low, to make plans without the prying eyes of the Dominion. But Darius knew this peace wouldn't last. The Dominion had their fingers everywhere. The storm was coming, and they were going to face it head on. No, Vera said, breaking the silence as they sat in the small, dimly lit room of the safe house. I never imagined this would be my life. A few weeks ago I was performing on stage, thinking it was all I needed. Now, everything's different. Darius glanced at her, his eyes softening. She had been through so much, yet she still held on to her strength. There was a quiet dignity in her, one that had been buried under layers of fear and control. But it was coming to the surface now. She was no longer just a victim. She had become a force of her own. You're not just a survivor, Darius replied, his voice calm but firm. You've turned the tables, you've become a fighter, and now we take the fight to them. Vera nodded, though her face was clouded with a mix of determination and uncertainty. But how? The Dominion, they have everything. Resources, connections, power. They control entire sectors of space. How can we possibly stand against them? Darius stood up, his gaze fixed on the holographic map displayed on the wall. We start by finding their weaknesses. Every empire has one, no matter how powerful. We need to gather evidence, something irrefutable, something they can't cover up. And once we have it, we expose them to the galaxy. If we can get to their heart, we can take them down. Vera followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing in thought. The stellar palette wasn't just a front for the restaurant. It was their base of operations. That's where they conducted their experiments. Project Harvest. I overheard their plans. I know where they keep their data, where they store everything. If we can get there, we can destroy it all. Darius's mind raced. This was it. The key to everything. The stellar palette wasn't just an elite dining spot. It was a center for some of the most twisted experiments the galaxy had ever seen. They had been using living beings as subjects, testing genetic enhancements, creating hybrids, all under the guise of providing exotic cuisine to the wealthy. He turned to Vera. Where exactly do we need to go? Vera paused, then pulled up a map of the station from her wrist device. The data center is in the lower levels, heavily guarded. It's locked down tight, but I know someone who can get us in. He's a former Dominion hacker. I don't trust him completely, but if we offer him the right incentive, he'll help. Darius studied the map for a moment. It was going to be risky. They were going up against the Syndicate's best, highly trained enforcers who had no mercy for traitors. But they didn't have a choice. This was the only chance they had to take down the Dominion. Get us in, Darius said with a hard edge to his voice. We'll handle the rest. The plan was set. Darius and Vera would infiltrate the stellar palette's lower levels under the cover of darkness, using the hackers' information to gain access to the data center. They would steal the files, destroy everything that the Dominion had been hiding, and expose their twisted operations to the galaxy. The moment they stepped inside the building, Darius felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The stakes were higher now than ever before. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting to change the course of the galaxy. They moved swiftly through the corridors, their movements silent and calculated. The faint hum of the building's energy systems filled the air, but otherwise the space was eerily quiet. The guard patrols they had anticipated were nowhere to be found. It was almost too easy. That's what they want us to think, Darius muttered under his breath, his senses sharp, always on alert. "Keep your eyes open, this is a trap." Just as he spoke, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Intruders detected in the lower levels. All units, report to the data center immediately." Vera's face paled. "They know we're here, we're running out of time." "We don't need time, we need precision," Darius replied, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed pistol at his side. "Move fast." They made their way to the data center, avoiding detection with the help of the hackers' backdoor access. But as they reached the entrance, a group of armed enforcers emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. "Going somewhere?" One of them sneered, leveling his weapon at Darius. The fight was inevitable. Darius moved with lightning speed, his training kicking in. He was a mercenary, a warrior, and these men were no match for him. He dodged the incoming fire, returning shots with deadly precision. Vera, despite her fear, followed his lead, taking down one of the guards with a swift calculated strike. They fought their way through, but the enforcers kept coming. Darius had no illusions about their situation. This wasn't just a fight to break in. This was a fight for their lives. As they reached the core of the data center, Darius planted an explosive charge on the main terminal. The countdown began. They had only minutes to get out. "We're not done yet," Vira said, her voice tight with urgency. "The Syndicate's forces will be here any second." "We'll deal with them," Darius replied, his gaze hardening. "We have what we came for. Let's make sure this data never sees the light of day again." The explosion rang out, the force shaking the very foundations of the stellar palette. The data center went dark, the screens flickering out, and the files they had come to steal were destroyed. The Syndicate had been exposed. But their fight was far from over. As they made their way back to the Widow's Call, the city around them erupted into chaos. The truth was out, and the galaxy would never be the same again. But even as they took to the stars, Darius knew this was only the beginning. The Syndicate would fight back. They always did. But he had something the Syndicate didn't: resolve. And with Vera by his side, he would see this fight through to the end.